So, welcome everyone to this third webinar in our series. Really happy to see so many of you here. As I said, probably it's a good alternative for a rainy and windy January day. And it's always very nice to have an inspiring moment in the beginning of the year, especially in January when there is always this dip in motivation that we notice, and the increase in workload, grading for many of us, exams and so on. So happy to see you all here. Today's challenge is to talk about asynchronous learning into a synchronous environment, and to actually make sure that we pass along and discuss the value, but also the challenges of this learning environment in a totally opposite one. But I'm very lucky because I'm joined by three great panelists. But before that, I'll just leave you here with the sessions, the other sessions, the upcoming sessions of this series, just for you to also know that we are one of the 7 webinars on different topics related to teaching and learning in digital environments. Today, as I said, I'm really happy to be joined by 3 great panelists and happy to chat and to discuss with them about this really important topic. You know some of them, or you've heard of them. We have Flower, we have Becky, and we have Naya, and all of them have quite a lot of experience in both designing and teaching in asynchronous environments, in online environments, but also specifically in asynchronous environments. So I think we're in very, very good hands. What are we going to focus on today? Ideally, we would like to talk about the value, but also the challenges of asynchronous learning. Also, really talking about the specificities of this learning environment type, but also how can we thrive despite all these challenges. And I'm really happy to be able to draw on the experience of educators from both the US and Europe. And I will maybe chip in myself with some thoughts, even though I'm personally not teaching and learning, I'm not teaching online, or let's say the digital learning use I have is quite limited, mostly in context of blended learning. But that can be as well valuable also in terms of asynchronous learning. So the idea is, how can we actually thrive? What are some tips? What are some ideas that we can use in order to make the best use of the asynchronous learning environment? And then we split it in a way, or we try to cover 2 perspectives. The design perspective, so the perspective of the people that are designing, or what should we think about when we design for the asynchronous learning environment, and how can we facilitate asynchronous learning effectively? So both perspectives will be covered here, and I think they're very important, and it's nice to cover both because they're complementary. Sometimes we tend to, or we are more involved in the design stage, but we're not really teaching those courses. And other times we are facilitating courses we haven't really designed ourselves, and we have to make the most of it. So my panelists are hopefully will address those 2 topics as well, along with many others. But these are our general goals for today. So first, I would just want to ask you, I'll stop sharing because I like to see the room a bit better, and the chat as well. I would like to ask you, because I think normally the audience for these webinars and for this series particularly is quite mixed, in the sense that we have people who teach, but also people who design, learning designers, academic developers. Maybe you can write in the chat very briefly so that we get a feeling, what is your role or your main role? Because often we have mixed roles, but what you identify with most, just for us to get a feel of who's in the room. And meanwhile, I will give the floor to Flower to start us up, please.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you to the organizers of this event and to all of you who have chosen to spend this time with us, or maybe you're watching the recording later. I really don't take it for granted that you are investing some of your precious time in learning how to be more effective in online teaching and facilitating great learning experiences. I'm sort of watching roles scroll through. It looks to me like we have a range of folks here. And I'm going to start actually by telling you a little fun fact about myself. Maybe the other panelists want to join me. This is off script. We didn't plan this. But in this moment, I feel compelled to share with you that I'm actually, you wouldn't know this but by listening to me, but I'm a UK citizen. And it actually brings me a lot of joy to be here with you, my people, those of you who are in the UK, even though it sounds pretty soggy I love to be in the UK, and I secretly love rainy weather. I'm from Arizona. I grew up in the most English household in Arizona. I feel very British in my heart. And so it's just bringing me some joy to be here with you. And I know not everybody is in the UK. Greetings and thank you to others who are joining from other parts of the world as well. But I tell you why I made a deliberate choice to take a few seconds and share that with you. It's because that's exactly what I'm going to encourage us to do in our asynchronous online classes. Find those little moments of connection, build them in if you are designing the class. And both Becky and Naya, I know, are going to chime in with additional tips like this. But for me, where my research and scholarship has been going most recently is to the importance of human connections and emotions and facilitating joy and fun and positivity in those classes. So I tipped my hand a little bit, I have to admit, but now I want to back up just a minute. We're here today. It's clear to me you care about online teaching and learning, want to do it better. So what I'm curious about today is one word, and I'll invite you to put this in the chat as well. One word that describes the way you feel genuinely about online teaching. What is one word or online education that you feel today? Excited, accessible, skeptical, that's fair. Perturbed, okay, I like that word. Focus, empowering, positive, possible, disconnected, thank you. Intentionally designed, yes. Obsessed, I love it so much. Surprised, innovative, emotionally invested. Inclusive, connected, ambivalent, thank you for that honesty. Efficient, but lonely, that's okay. I'll take a two-word answer. Awkward at the start, yes. Flexible, good, I'm seeing that a few times. Right. I think, as to Alexandra's point, it's challenging. We're concerned about what we're facing with online teaching and learning in the world that we live in now with AI on the horizon, not on the horizon, it's here. Convenient, inclusive. Yeah, I also thought there would be more ambivalence coming through, Becky. And then I see a question here about it is maybe challenging to relate with people in online classes. And resource intensive, yes, to do it right, to be vulnerable in these classes, we can do better is the way. Well, I think many of us are striving to do better. Pragmatic, I like that. It solves a lot of it solves a lot of challenges for learners who choose this environment. There isn't any ageism. Interesting. I hadn't really thought about that angle before, but efficient, yes, it is. So I prefer, I just read, is it Deepak? I just read your word. It's not what I was going to say, but I prefer learning and talking with you all here today. What I notice is that there is a range of emotional experiences that we have when it comes to online learning, and that is actually really important to attend to because, again, what my area of research and scholarship has been in recent years is how emotions impact our ability to think. And the same is true for our students as well. So recognizing that sometimes it does not, in fact, I would argue many times it does not feel as fun to me as teaching and learning in person, right? It is not the same, but it is powerful. And there are ways that we can enhance our own experience as instructors, our experience as learning designers to really put the needs of the learners front and center. I'm just giving a little preview of what we're all going to be talking about today. But really, that is one of the main things that I'm focusing on now is how can we enjoy teaching and learning online more? And so I do want to draw back the curtain and explain why I asked you that one word. This is an activity that demonstrates an element of learning science. And so for any learning designers in the room, or even if you're facilitating, you can pop this question into an announcement or a discussion forum. If you're meeting real time with students, perhaps, although we're focused on asynchronous today, you can plant the seed. You can ask people about their experience with a topic. And what this does is it activates their prior knowledge. That primes the pump for new learning to stick. So this is a principle from learning science, from the research on how we learn. And anything that we can do to create moments for people to think about what they already know. Maybe it's an ungraded survey. Try to remember everything from the last module, for example. Or maybe it's a free write that you ask people to do, or a discussion post. What do you remember from the previous course in this program? Maybe it is very conversational, like we did today on a discussion post. Maybe you're teaching organizational psychology and you say, have you ever had a boss who was kind of like this? right? Maybe you're teaching sociology and you ask students to think about their experiences in a group fitness setting or a workplace environment where how did the community behave? How did individuals feel that they fit in? This is an element right from learning science. It keeps asynchronous classes more engaging, and I would encourage us to be thinking about that intentionality. How can we build in principles of learning science? There's only one other thing that I want to sort of model or demonstrate in my quick moment here, and then I will we'll pause and see if people have questions for me specifically before we move on to Becky, who will focus more on the learning design of asynchronous classes. And that is, I have an activity to help us prioritize social connections, because that really is, again, the key to facilitating and designing, because it's part, you have to plan these events. They don't just happen naturally. So I am going to ask you to take a look at this slide. Choose one photo that best describes the way you're feeling about the upcoming weekend. It's Thursday. We have a weekend ahead of us in the United States. It happens to be a 3-day weekend for many of us. So I would encourage you to choose one photo, put your word in the chat that describes which one that you choose, and then maybe even a word or two about why you chose that photo. This is one way to prioritize social connections, even in online spaces. This makes a good discussion board activity or an individual assignment. I see balloons, I see dog, cat, the dog because you're excited, the mountains for the adventure ahead, the balloons because it's your birthday weekend, happy birthday to you, mountains because skiing, the cat, you need to rest. I know that cat always appeals to me. The cat adventure, the cat looks a little bit frisky too sometimes. The mountain because you want to get outside, the dog, the bird because you're doing some watercolor painting this weekend. I love that so much. The dogs and also the resting cat for Naya. Yes, I love that. So this is a kind of activity. Now notice here, many of us, I mean, there's only 6 photos to choose from. So we're finding some connections even among the responses. We have some dog people here. We have some cat people. We have some people who can't wait to get outside. And we also see some nuance. All the pictures except necessarily the windows and the balloons. I like that. We see some nuance in some of these photos. Those mountains, sometimes those look overwhelming to people. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed today as you think about the work that's ahead of you prior to the start of term, or maybe you're feeling particularly isolated. That window in a dark room is speaking to you. This is an activity that I strongly recommend. Again, it works great as an asynchronous activity. You can have learners take turns. You could rotate through creating a different slide every week, or you could ask students to submit an image or even a meme, or there's endless variations on this, but it is a way of structuring those social connections, helping learners connect with each other. If that is a key aspect of the course that you are teaching is community building, many times it is. Every once in a while, it doesn't suit the needs of the learners. But this is the kind of thing that I'm going to encourage us to do. Build in these moments, facilitate these opportunities to connect with students, help them connect with each other. That really will benefit their learning. So that's all I really wanted to say in my quick moment. I'd like to check in and see if there are any particular questions for me before we move on to our next panelist, Becky.
So please feel free to ask any questions, particularly to this topic. Thanks, Flower, for mentioning this personal dimension, this presence dimension for both teachers and facilitators and students in the asynchronous environment. I think it's definitely a crucial aspect, and I'm happy that we started with it. If there are any immediate questions to that, yes, I see Charlie has hands up, or it's just the clapping.
Flower, there was a question in the chat about, do you have any recommendations on science learning readings or places to go?
Oh, yes, I certainly do. I will I'll name 1 or 2 titles, but then I believe we're going to distribute a resources document. I can also add that information there. There's a fabulous book that first introduced me to these topics. It's called Make It Stick. And what I love about it is about learning in any context. So maybe you want to learn Italian for your summer vacation or scuba diving. The principles are exactly the same as what works in our classes. So I love Make It Stick. There are 3 authors. I don't remember the order. I'm also very beholden to Small Teaching because I had the opportunity to co-author Small Teaching online. Small Teaching is James Lang, and he talks about these principles of learning science and then what are little things that we can do, not overwhelming things, So those are a couple. I can add a couple of more to the resources document as well. Thank you for helping me identify that question, Naya. I didn't see it. Thanks.
There are a few more questions in the chat as well. How can you support this in a fully asynchronous environment? But also, yeah, the last question you can probably read as well.
Yeah, so again, the trick with presenting and having a real-time conversation is, of course, we're going to model things in real time, but I really try to model things that work well in asynchronous environments too. So that particular slide or that activity, it could be a very robust discussion forum, asynchronous interaction between students. You can change it up a little bit, right? It doesn't just have to be pictured on a slide, although I like that it checks in with people. And to answer or address the other question there that I think I was seeing, it can be social, that you can finish that sentence however you want to. It could be a social question, as I kind of asked you about your weekend, or it could be more academic focused, such as, how are you feeling about the group project that you're working on in this class? How are you feeling about all of your classes that you're taking? It can be an individual assignment, and if you do it that way, people are likely to be a little bit more vulnerable. Maybe somebody might divulge that they're struggling, and then you have an opportunity to connect with that individual and offer support resources. You know, maybe your university or college has an office or resources that can help. So hopefully that addresses some of the ones that are coming in.
Yeah, I think it's good to think that things that we see normal or natural in the synchronous, in a face-to-face or synchronous environment, we need to design them or think of them a little bit more through in terms of to implement in an asynchronous environment. But it's not impossible. If there is a will and if there is something that you want to do, there is always a way to do it and to design it in such a way. And the next, our next panelist, Becky, will focus on the design aspect. But before that, actually, let's leave it at that for now, just in the interest of time, and we'll have more time at the end for more general questions to all panelists. And with that, because we started to move into the design side and thinking about how we can implement those great ideas in the asynchronous environment, I'll give the word to Becky, and she will explain, or she will, let's say, give us some insights from her experience with designing asynchronous environments. Becky, please.
Thanks, Alexandra. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the word normal and normalizing, because my normal is asynchronous. And I was thinking this morning about kind of my route into education. I come originally from a print publishing background, which is probably the ultimate in asynchronous learning. And you can see maybe my logo behind me. I currently work as a lead learning designer at the University of the Built Environment, which is a specialist UK provider of higher education for kind of the construction industry, architecture, all those kind of related built environment topics. And before that, I spent 18 years at the Open University, which is, you know, the biggest UK university by far. And both of those institutions, in a way, most of the provision is asynchronous. So there are opportunities for synchronous events. But I think someone had put in the chat about asynchronous being second best or second choice. And, you know, we saw a lot in the pandemic about the kind of pivot to online, where, you know, it was very much presented at school and university level as a kind of second class education. But my experiences of learners who were actually choosing these institutions because they're asynchronous, and, you know, I think both the OU and UBE started as distance learning correspondence courses. So maybe they were already in an asynchronous mindset. So we haven't, at both of those places, I haven't had that kind of leap of like, how do we convert what we would have done face to face in traditional university physical spaces to an online thing? And, you know, our students come in knowing that and expecting that. And they're looking at, you know, the benefits, the positives of asynchronous. And, you know, maybe you already know these, but for those of you who are less experienced, I'm going to kind of run through the top ones. So high flexibility and autonomy for learners. And that can, you know, include learners who have, you know, disabilities, who have work commitments, who have caring commitments. I mean, for example, some stats from the OU, 69% of their students work full or part-time. 38,991, as a specific number from 23-24, were students declaring one or more disabilities. So having more options than kind of schlepping into a physical campus is a real priority for them. And obviously asynchronous and online allow for that. And leading on from that about disabilities, accessibility, inclusivity is, often highlighted as a benefit of asynchronous. So you've got kind of multimodal content. In the OU specifically, they have a kind of generate the content in XML. So it's a single input, and then you can output as, Word, PDF, web pages, MP3, a variety of formats. At UBU, we use a Brickfield add-on, which, will kind of convert formats at the touch of a button for students. Another benefit of asynchronous, more time to process, reflect, engage. So that can be good for content-heavy disciplines, but it can also be good for neurodivergent learners, who may not be comfortable interacting in real time, being put on the spot in a kind of synchronous class. It's also often highlighted as kind of providing a more level playing field for quiet students, whatever your interpretation of quiet is there. There's the scalability side, but I'm not going to touch too much on that. But I think it's really interesting what Flower says about small teaching, because my experiences of big teaching, courses with hundreds, in the OU's case, sometimes even thousands of students. Now, obviously, you don't have a single educator for the kind of related synchronous events or for kind of responding to all the marking tutoring. The OU has a model of like 1 tutor to 20 students, I think, something like that. But potentially on the big courses, there are 2,000 students. So, you can't manage that without some kind of scalability strategies. I think I've seen recently, I've got in my head scaffold, not straitjacket, that I think I've totally stolen from someone else's presentation. But that's very much how I see our kind of learning design frameworks that are enabling consistency, quality control, that kind of thing. And, again, when you've got time poor students, making it really clear to them, what the expectations are, how the material, is framed in relation to learning outcomes and assessment, what tasks they'll be expected to undertake. Having, that kind of thing templated is essential, really. And I think well-being is another consideration, not just because of the kind of, disabilities, neurodivergence aspects, but just the kind of literally meeting students where they are. Okay, not physically, but I still think very much of asynchronous as a place. And I'm afraid I am a complete fan of the VLE, and I think people who want to kill it are doing it wrong. That's my provocation. If you think the VLE should die, you've obviously, experienced really bad VLEs. And I have experienced bad VLEs myself, in the last couple of years studying elsewhere. So yeah, I think, there's a couple of comments in the chat about engagement, and that can be a challenge. But like the most recent module I've worked on at UBE, I was really surprised to see that actually where we provided Padlet type activities, forums, things like that, which again are seen by many as kind of old fashioned and outdated, they were getting way more engagement from students than the live weekly webinars. So I think it's about, our intent in designing, but it's also about the students' intent in the kind of education they're seeking. And again, picking up on Flower's point about kind of asking people about their experience, whether that's of online learning, of subject matter. I mean, one of the tools that I've used a lot at the OU and at UBE is student profiles, student personas as part of the learning design process. So, we're not going to capture every learner's experience, but if we can kind of try to identify realistic barriers to learning, whether they've had you know, unhappy online experiences, unhappy face-to-face experiences, whether there are, you know, language issues, whether there are technology issues, digital capability issues, if we can actually think about all of those and design those into the learning, you know, hopefully we can preempt some of the issues that Flower and others in the chat have highlighted. What else? Yeah, so the community and social side of things. I mean, again, it is tricky, and it requires, you know, purposeful design. So, you know, how you use forums, how you use peer review, how you use feedback. But, you know, I think although I'm extremely pro asynchronous learning, and, you know, I tried to kind of search on what are the arguments against it before this session. I think actually, you know, most of them can be addressed with good learning design, good user experience design. But, you know, equally, it's not for everyone. And I think what I saw, you know, in 18 years at the OU was a real change from it was kind of badged when it was first set up as the university of second choice, because it had been set up for people who were unable to attend a traditional university for various reasons. And so when I first joined, there were a lot of mature learners who already had degrees. You know, it was kind of, you know, retirement. The joke was that there were kind of like ladies whose children had flown the nest who wanted to do an art history degree. But over my time there, it changed dramatically and became the university of first choice for a lot of students, because of the things I've mentioned, because of caring responsibilities, because of money, you know, that they couldn't afford to relocate to a physical new city or travel into a campus regularly. So, oh, I've lost my thread. Yeah, so university of first choice. And I'm definitely seeing that now in a very much industry-focused institution where, you know, students in construction may have come from sort of work their way up in more physical manual jobs, but they reach a point in their career where they need higher education qualifications to achieve kind of chartered status. So again, they're coming in particularly because they're not looking for the traditional campus-based university in-person experience. And again, I mean, in a way that makes my job as a learning designer really easy, because their needs and wants and preferences are a lot easier to capture, because, you know, we work alongside professional bodies who have a huge amount of data about their members. Yeah, I think that's most of what I wanted to say.
Hey, thank you. Thank you very much, Becky. It was really interesting to hear you putting the learner first, talking about the learner, certainly the learner, because that's also something really important. And also making clear, emphasizing the fact that asynchronous learning, online learning even, but asynchronous learning is not for everyone, but can be very beneficial for some of us, for many of us. So very, very interesting points. I also tried to follow the chat. There were some interesting questions there.
I'm looking at it now, trying to keep up.
Some were related to the design, some were more general. I try to make a note and keep them more towards the end. I see that Flower already started answering some of them in between. We will come back to some of the main points I kind of noted, but feel free to also respond in the meantime if you have time to some of the questions. I think one of the ideas, some of the questions linked to the how to make students really engage in the asynchronous learning space. How do you arrange, sort of how do you reconcile the idea of asynchronous learning with contact hours? That's a very important one. Maybe hopefully we'll come back to that towards the end. General tips about how to manage forums. Do we reply immediately? Do we reply to everyone? So I see some questions already given by yourselves. So all of you contributing, I think that's super important. So I think in the interest of time, we will continue with Naya's point, and then we will collect all the questions and try to have a nice discussion around them. So Naya, we'll talk about mainly facilitating asynchronous online courses. Please.
Well, thank you, Alexandra, and thanks to all of you. I'm super excited to be here. As Alexandra said in the beginning, many of us are doing many things in online education. Like Becky, I design courses for my full-time job, but I'm also an online adjunct, and I'm also an online feminist pedagogue. So I'm going to talk about those two latter things today and dig into the practicalities of facilitating asynchronous online courses. So as an adjunct, I teach courses that some people call constrained. So that means I don't have a lot of autonomy or control over the curriculum. So I can't rewrite the syllabus if it's not working. I can't swap out an assignment. If we discovered that maybe it's not accomplishing the learning outcome the way we hoped, I'm kind of stuck with the course as it is. But what I can control is my presence. And often that presence I'm controlling or contributing from kind of places that we might think of as the margins of asynchronous online spaces. And for me personally, presence is everything in asynchronous online learning. And as some of our panelists and some of our guests have shared, presence is not easy to maintain in these environments. It is an intentional act. It is time consuming. It is intensive, but it is worth it. And so, especially in the era of AI, and I have mixed feelings about AI, being human, being present, that's essential. And so I'm going to share today 2 ways specifically that I use my humanity and my feminist pedagogical background to be human and to be present in these environments. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is maximizing those micro moments. And Flower talked about those moments a little bit with us. But what does that mean? That means I show up strategically and I fill potential silences, that distance that is actually a part of distance education, but can be combated with humanity. And I do that by creating cultures of care. So one way I do that, I use names all the time. I've written about this, and some people might think I use names to ad nauseum. But if I'm responding to a discussion post, I say, hi, student name. If I'm giving feedback on an assignment, hi, student name. In an announcement, I mention student names. I'm throwing names all over the place. Names are important. Names are a way to notice. It's really a low lift, but a high touch thing you can do in online education. I build wraparound support. So like I said, I can't control the curriculum, but what I can control is a friendly weekly video. I can control the feedback that I leave, which is always encouraging, even or especially when encouraging growth and noticing areas for opportunity and improvement. I leave tips and tricks, helpful resources. I'm filling up all of those spaces that I can put my presence into intentionally. I ask open-ended questions. We had a question in the discussion about how to handle discussion boards where it's not just like responding tediously to every single post and then dropping it there. I ask questions. I don't pretend to have all the answers all of the time, even though I'm an expert. And I really rely on appreciative inquiry, which is question-based. So I ask students to engage by asking them a question about what they've written, about their own experience and expertise, about their lives. And then I ask them questions that help them connect to each other's posts. And so that's a great way, again, to be human because humans are curious, right, by nature. And so that's a way that I infuse that humanity and that intentionality. And it's those micro moments that transform a standardized course shell that I'm dealing with to a space where we all feel seen and empowered. Names are personhoods. Authentic interaction is community building. Wraparound supports, that's the way I show that I care. And all of this together honors the lived experience of learners and my own, which are coming together in community and builds mutual respect and trust. And those are the foundations for me of effective online learning. Now, the second way is to make the temporal transparent. One of the beauties of asynchronous online learning is that it is accessible anytime, anywhere. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't complications with that. Sometimes that can come with an expectation of being always on, which we don't want. But it is a way for people to learn who maybe are constrained in other ways. Adult learners like myself, people who have parenting or caretaking responsibilities, people who, like myself, work multiple jobs. Sometimes this is the only way to achieve education. And so how can we make the most of these temporal, sometimes privileges, and how can we combat some of the problems of temporality. Again, it's all about claiming it intentionally. So I mentioned that there can be a default culture, surveillance mindsets. I don't like them. Obsession with productivity, that push to be always on, always available. Those things exist in asynchronous online education, but possibilities exist too. Pause. It's a great space to take pause, to give learners a chance to pause, to reflect, to have unrestricted learning. And I want to model for my learners how to make the most of those things, and to really acknowledge the materiality of labor and bodies and possibility, not just productivity. And so one way I do that is a really simple way. I make my own thinking process and my own time management visible. So I say things like, I am available to you every day except Saturdays, because Saturdays I spend the day with my family and I completely disconnect. And I expect that you're going to have time that you need and should disconnect from this class as well. Um, when I'm giving feedback, I say, I read your essay on Tuesday. It's now Saturday. I'm still thinking about it. And here's what I've thought about in the days in between. Now, yes, that's time intensive. It's a lot for me as an educator. You can't ignore that fact, but it models for my learners that like I am thinking things over for a couple days. It's not just like an immediate transactional interaction. And I model the curiosity that I mentioned earlier. So, I was thinking about what you said in our discussion post, and now I'm thinking about what someone else said and how can we connect these ideas? Or I'll put it in an announcement. We had a great conversation about X. Let's keep that going this week, but let's add in what we're going to be doing. And so what I'm trying to do is just show the benefits of being able to pause, being able to reflect, being able to engage, not immediately, and the benefits of that to our learning and to the learning and reflection process, which are essential, I think, for success in this environment. And to show transparently that learning is labor, reflection is labor. Waiting is still active work. Rest, as we said with the cat picture, rest is productive. It's just a different kind of productive. And I want learners to understand that, regardless of subject matter that we're covering, because in asynchronous online learning, self-care and boundaries are secrets, and they shouldn't be, to success. And so I want to be really open with that with my learners. So even though I might teach in constrained, what some people consider constrained environments, and even though I'm making magic sometimes from the margins, I still feel like I'm able to model what matters and make the most of asynchronous online learning. And that's presence as care, time as a resource for deeper thinking, and human connection. And I just want to emphasize that all of that is possible and should be, in my opinion, part of the learning process in these spaces.
Thank you very much, Naya. This is really, really inspirational. And I think you touched upon all the important things, starting with being intentional, which I think is super important in any learning experience, but definitely in an asynchronous experience where we are lacking, or at least the impression is that we are lacking what naturally comes in a classroom, for instance. So I think you made amazing points there, and I saw a lot of people resonating with that in the chat as well. I think now, because most of you have seen already, spotted some questions and maybe engaged with them already in the chat, maybe I'll give you a couple of minutes to each of you, or as in whichever order you would like, to answer some things that you immediately have on your mind through the questions you read. And then if you haven't touched on them, I will come back to some of the questions I noted down. Okay? Who wants to go first? Or if you have something that, otherwise I will spotlight some questions myself, but maybe you have already something.
Alexandra, since you haven't really had a dedicated moment, I did notice in some of your responses in the chat that you said, I could speak to this. So I would invite you to take a turn and address some of those things. And then as time permits, we can
Yes, thank you very much, Flower. Actually, it's good that you reminded me about that because I took on my role as facilitator and I put out my hat as a teacher and learning designer, but maybe I should put on that hat as well. So yes, what I can bring in here is a slightly different perspective, because I think somebody mentioned in the chat that asynchronous learning doesn't always have to exist by itself. So I think in most of your cases, you are teaching mostly in asynchronous environments or designing mostly for solely asynchronous environments or learning, online learnings, asynchronous environments. I teach in a basically face-to-face environment, and where we're trying to include some digital aspects every now and then, more or less successfully. But asynchronous parts are the parts that I really want to favor, at least in the next semester. And so and I've been trying before, but I want to sort of push them because I work at Maastricht University, and we have problem-based learning as our signature pedagogy. And so we have very small group learning, active learning, students always in the center. But a very important part of that, basically this cannot take place if students don't do their independent learning before. So for the independent learning part, for us, it's a black box. Basically, they come unprepared. We don't really know what happened. They can't really focus and contribute in the classroom as we would like them to. So what I think can definitely, and it sounds like a no-brainer, but in fact, it's not apparently, is to actually scaffold, use Canvas, use our VLE, LMS, whatever you want to call it, use it to scaffold that independent learning part. So in this way, I'm seeing asynchronous as a blend, as a one element of the blend in a sort of blended learning or mixed learning experience. So basically, how I use it is to scaffold their independent learning with some assignments, with some questions, prompts, and that flows then back into the classroom. But equally, it could flow back into a synchronous online element. So it doesn't have to be that asynchronous learning exists by itself. In some contexts it does, but in many contexts it can be a part of a learning experience that is fully online but spans both synchronous and asynchronous, or even on a campus experience where you bring in some digital aspects. So I find it really, really useful, at least in my context, for this independent work. And I saw some comments in the chat also related to that, and I think it can be a very good scaffolding method for the independent work. Thank you, Flower, for reminding me. So now if you have any other thoughts, or if anyone has a question they want to voice, I don't want to keep it only in the chat. If somebody wants to ask directly, please feel free. We'd love to hear from you as well.
Becky, you go and then I'll...
No, I was just going to say there's a lot of questions in the chat about kind of forums and improving engagement and, you know, how to strategies for that. And so there were a couple of things I forgot to mention. So particularly at UBE, we have lots of opportunities for students to ask questions and give feedback. You know, there's obviously end of module questionnaires, but actually there's a weekly anonymous kind of temperature check on how they felt about that week's learning materials, that week's learning experience. And you know, we make a point as learning designers and the module leaders of looking at that, you know, when we're going through and reviewing the module and feeding that back in. So I think analytics to get feedback and looking at that can be really useful, you know, the kind of positive side of analytics rather than the kind of surveillance side. And my own online PG Cert experience a year or so ago was that use of forums was kind of built into this assessments in a kind of formative and summative way. So we were actually, you know, we had to include conversations we'd had, extracts of that, in the forums, in some of our assessment tasks, and kind of showing how others had influenced our thinking, how we'd influenced others' thinking. So if you hadn't done that, you didn't have those evidences to put in your assignment. And actually it made for much better forums than I'd experienced before. But someone else mentioned in the chat about, yeah, but students can just use AI now to generate a forum post. And I think that just highlights how important it is to have a really good moderator or moderators on forums who are kind of equipped to spot that and challenge that maybe and include questions that, you know, couldn't really be answered meaningfully by an AI response. So, I mean, that's all kind of helped me. And I would say, you know, again, one benefit of the forums for me as a student how searchable they were. So I was able, it was almost like notes had been taken for me on some of the topics we discussed, and I was able to kind of reflect on those later and, kind of ask myself questions, research them more and kind of expand on actually what the original, questions were in the post. So I think it did genuinely encourage deeper learning, even though, they can be seen as a bit superficial and basic.
Thank you, Becky, for that. Any questions that Naya or Flower read and sparked your interest that you would like to speak a bit more on? Even if you maybe gave answers in the chat, but I have to say the chat goes so fast that probably majority haven't seen them. So any points you want to make on those questions?
I apologize. There's been so many comments since then that I'm forgetting the person's name. But your comment was very important, as are all the comments. Someone mentioned that culturally, using first names might not always be the preferred name. And I wanted to acknowledge that because it's true, we want to build inclusive, caring, safe, and brave spaces. So what I do usually either through a pre-survey or in the first discussion, even if I can't control the prompt, I can add things. I ask what students want to be called. I try not to say preferred name because some people take offense to that because their real name is their real name, not their preferred name. But I ask them how they would like me to address them, and then I use that name throughout our experience together. So I'm always trying to honor lived experience. No method is perfect. There's always room for improvement, but that was a really important point that I just wanted to bring to the group.
Thank you. Thank you, Naya. I've seen that question pop up or that comment pop up as well while you were speaking. I mean, in my view, this is quite interesting because it does, like asynchronous learning can be more inclusive, but also, especially with big cohorts of students, it's very difficult to be very personal and to use the tips that Naya mentioned. So in my smaller groups, it's always fine. But I have the feeling in bigger groups, it can be difficult. And also, especially in heterogeneous groups in terms of culture, background, and so on, I think it's important to pay attention to that. And a general advice for anyone teaching and is pay attention to who your students are. That's easier or more difficult depending on your context and numbers. I see a hand raised, maybe Lucy. Please.
I'm also looking at the chat, which is absolutely fascinating, but
yes,
very quickly. So I'm going to go verbal.
Yes.
I thank you for all the speakers and all the comments in the chat. Really fascinating, and it's interesting that some people experience a more responsive group if it's smaller, some of it's bigger. It depends on your audience. I think what I was especially listening to Naya and the responsiveness. A lot of that very much chimes with me. But I wondered if anybody's it's maybe that kind of commitment clash and being pulled in different directions. If you're kind of delivering and supporting asynchronous teaching, and then the next day going into the classroom and delivering live and in person, and I'm thinking maybe this is me as an overstretched academic here, so I'm just going to put that out there of dealing how we responsive to our maybe different audiences, if we do have different audiences or even single audiences, and not burn out, I suppose.
Thank you for a question, Lucy. Anyone wants to try to give an answer?
I'll just very briefly address this point. Again, there were some similar points that were raised. I think a lot of what Naya and I specifically talked about really can be very time intensive, and it's truly important to honor your own well-being as well as academics, because you can't interact with and support your students if you yourself are completely depleted. So my recommendation is to be very strategic and intentional. Intentional is one of my favorite words. Think about your boundaries, your time. I like how Naya talked about communicating when you're not going to be available. That way students do not approach you as a 24/7 chatbot, which we cannot and should not be. Let students know about your availability and when you're taking time for yourself. I also love how Naya modeled telling students you also need to protect some time for yourself. So strategy, picking a little bit that you can do within the limits of your ability and time, But again, I really like what Naya was saying about using people's names, as doesn't take very much time at all, but makes a big impact. So maybe it's about being strategic about what you choose to do within the limits of your time. I see another raised hand, so I want to make time for that question as well.
Thank you,
Yes.
Flower. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Please, Ali, you can ask your question.
Let me put my camera back
yes.
on. Having a bit of a technology fail. Sorry about that. A little bit embarrassing. Yeah, I was just a quick question for you. I'm a program. I'm leading the program, the MBA program online asynchronously at York, and I'm part of the online team. But I'm also a module leader and I'm a face-to-face teacher as well. So I'm kind of fitting across all three roles. So I have quite a lot of experience kind of flipping across. What I wanted to ask you guys was, how do you feel at a program level when you're designing the entire kind of module and then you're designing the program? How do you feel the kind of asynchronous strategy fits together? Because we kind of have an experience where there has to be quite a holistic thought about how you put your program together and then how you put your module together. So it's very much with normal teaching, we have I say normal teaching, but with face-to-face teaching, we have the MLOs and the peer and the module learning objectives dropping into things like that. We've taken it a little bit further, that we have guides in terms of how you interact and how you develop your relationship with your students. And these kind of spaces that you're talking about, Naya talks about these spaces that create, that's something we actually train our tutors to do, and we work with them. So it's just a general question is how holistic do you think the vision has to be in terms of designing these courses and putting together these modules so you understand asynchronicity? Because it's very difficult to understand that, because when you come from a face-to-face environment and you go into an asynchronous environment, it is really, really hard for us to communicate with the rest of the university and a lot of stakeholders how that works, because the mindset is so different. And we find that tutors that we bring on board really struggle to understand how asynchronicity works as a teaching instrument, as a teaching tool. So just a couple of things for you guys to kind of comment on, please.
Thank you very much, Ali, for this question, especially because you bring it to the program level. We're talked mostly micro level in our own courses or in the courses we design, but I think it's really important to look at the program level. Anyone of you three have some ideas on that you would like to or thoughts about how to tackle that at program level to make sure it's consistent?
Well, I would say for me, that consistency is key. Like if you can build familiar experiences for learners at the program level, even across different micro experiences, and doing all the things that you just said, Ali, that you're doing, you're building templates, you're connecting people, you're giving them guides. That's all the foundational elements of effective online facilitation. And it sounds like you're being really intentional with that.
Yeah, I think being explicit as well. Somebody was also mentioning in the course, just being explicit, making the connections between the modules explicit, because of course we need to do that also in the classroom, but with an asynchronous environment where we don't get to see our students naturally most of the time, or never even, making sure we communicate this in many ways, maybe multimodal. We signpost everything that we design into the program well. I guess that can help as well. That's something that I suggest for any environment, but definitely for the asynchronous environment at the program level is even more important.
Can I just add for colleagues, on the program level, we get a lot of feedback from students about the quality of the interaction. And there's a lot of cross comparison that goes on between modules across the program level. So there is always, I think we need to be aware students talk to each other, even on asynchronous courses.
Yes.
And they do, and when it comes to PGs, especially on online asynchronous courses, they're very, very active. They like to talk to each other. They're very, very kind of turned on. They're switched on, the students. They want to interact as much as possible, and get as much out of that as much as possible. Because as Dr. Bond said, as Naya said, people are doing this in their spare time. People are doing this as part of their careers. They're not necessarily doing it, on a campus. So we get a lot of the things that you talk about, there's pauses and the interactions and how they work, actually do go into feedback. And it's part of that student experience that we create. Liz is on the chat as well, one of my colleagues. So, she's done quite a bit of work on this. So it's just something to bear in mind for everybody as you're designing your programs.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. It's yeah, students do see the program as a whole, and we as educators sometimes miss those connections that they get to see so well in their experience. And I think we should match that definitely. Anyone wants to have a quick, yes, Becky.
Just in response to that, I think, one of the biggest challenges with developing online learning is the resourcing side of it and the lead times. And, if you're designing at a program level, that's even more challenging. So, not appointing educators for individual modules at the last minute so that you have time and space to ensure that they have the same kind of consistent practices and expectations around, like response times, how they engage with students, what each different kind of mode of learning will involve, and what can be expected. And, I think, we've all heard kind of the sort of arguments about like, oh, online will be cheaper, and it's like, well, good online isn't. It might be slower and a lot more expensive to develop to ensure that you don't have the kind of issues that people have experienced. And I think that the tide is maybe slightly turning on that. I don't know if he's here, but I know Neil Mosley writes a lot about this, like stop thinking of it as a cheap alternative because it's going to be bad if that's how you approach it. But it is incredibly challenging, and for the academics in the audience who are juggling multiple priorities, keeping up with your own sort of digital capabilities, knowing what their expectations are around online interactions, if all your experience has been in a face-to-face environment, is another massive load to juggle alongside all your other tasks.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I would like to quickly ask each of my panelists for one trick they want, one tip or trick they want to leave you with, either for designing or for facilitating asynchronous online learning, and then wrap up the session. So whoever wants to start first, very quickly, very punchy, one thing you want to leave all the audience with today.
I'll jump in because I'm not muted. Seems like there was some interest in learning science earlier, so I'll share one more quick tip. If we provide a guided notes document for every unit or module in the VLE or LMS, a way for students to take structured notes about module materials, about videos, about readings, about their reflections, that actually helps them construct the connections in their minds and remember that information more deeply. So quick tip, hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Flower. Becky?
That makes me happy because we do that.
And what would be your tip, Becky?
My tip is, if you haven't already done it, experience some online and asynchronous learning yourself, whether it's a MOOC or, something more formal. There is no better way of clarifying what you like and dislike about that experience than going through the learning experience.
Perfect. Thanks, Becky. And Naya? Last words to you.
They're both so hard to follow. I'm going to cheat and say two things. One is be human, and two is talk to your learners. So often in any modality, we make decisions about learning that don't involve our learners, and that's got to stop. We've got to just talk to them and be human and use that to guide us.
Thank you very much, Naya. And there is no other way, no other better way I can finish the session today. Thank you very much to my three panelists, also to all of you who joined and who were so active in today's session. It was really a pleasure, and I will be looking forward to reading the chat again, because definitely didn't have the time to read everything. But thanks a lot. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next sessions. And as usual, if you still have a few minutes and you can stay with us, we'll stop the recording. And if you have some more questions for our panelists, we'll be around for another 10 minutes or so. Thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of the week and take care. See you in the next sessions.
Thanks, everyone.